Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. Happy Wednesday. So, Dawn Hughes is the 11th witness called by the prosecution in this case. She is a board-certified clinical and forensic psychologist. She is an experienced expert witness, having testified in cases including the 2022 defamation trial of Amber Heard and Johnny Depp. She testified that her experience is unique because she's almost always had training in trauma. She said she started working at a domestic violence survivors program in graduate school. Judge Subramanian qualified Dawn Hughes as an expert witness in clinical and forensic psychology, specializing in trauma and traumatic stress. It's routine for an expert witness to answer questions about their credentials and experience before they are qualified at trial. Dawn Hughes testified she has not assessed any of the victims or the witness in this case, nor has she interviewed anyone connected to the case. She said she has seen some press coverage of the case, but she has not been following what's been happening in court. She testified that she's being paid $600 an hour for her work and $6,000 for a day of testimony in court. Dawn Hughes testified that it's very common for victims to stay in abusive relationships. She explained that perpetrators often use various abusive methods beyond just physical violence to make victims feel trapped. It's about the power and control that the abuser has over the victim. Sexual abuse is a very private harm, which can make it difficult for a victim to seek help to leave an abusive relationship. She says they experience a tremendous amount of shame, humiliation, degradation. They don't want to talk about it. They don't even want to think about it in their own brain. She testified that a victim's financial dependence on an abuser plays a very important role in their decision to stay in an abusive situation. She explained that resources are necessary for a victim to leave the relationship, and when an abuser controls their general living expenses, it's hard for the victim to see a way out. The abuser is sabotaging a victim's ability to have independence. How are you to leave if you don't have access to those tangible resources? She said. Abusive relationships often have love and kindness in them in addition to the abuse. The victim wants that. They want that back. So when that is shown to the victim, that's very reinforcing. She testified that a trauma bond is when somebody is attached to their partner in spite of violence and abuse. A trauma bond can make a victim unwilling to leave a relationship. She said it often takes multiple attempts for victims to leave abusive relationships. There's this pattern of returning and reconciliation and then returning again. She said victims could want to come back to the good version of their partner that they still do love. She said they may also return because the abuse is still continuing outside of the relationship. As the abuse becomes more severe, so do the coping mechanisms. A victim's coping mechanisms usually exist within the confines of the relationship. Sometimes this includes fighting back, but the most common coping mechanism is trying to work things out with the abusive partner to stop the abuse and preserve the love. She discussed both passive and active self-defense during her testimony under questioning by the prosecution. Passive self-defense includes actions that are the least provoking as possible to get the violent episode to stop, including blocking, punches, or curling up on the floor. Active self-defense includes throwing objects or hitting back against abuse. Victims use active self-defense to have some way of standing up for themselves, although in many cases that usually results in more severe injury to themselves. She said it's common for victims in abusive relationships to use substances to numb themselves. Victims will often take drugs or drink before they see their partner, preventively to ward off other physical or psychological pain to come. It's uncommon for victims to talk about the abuse around the time it occurs. She explained that a victim is usually more willing to discuss abuse from a stranger than from a partner. The closer the relationship to the perpetrator, the less likely you are going to be to disclose. Abusive victims often use minimizing and hedging language when disclosing the abuse. They don't want to label themselves a victim. They don't want to label the abuser as abuser. It's too painful to admit that fact that somebody who loved me did this to me. They are still in self-blame. She testified about the ways trauma impacts memory. She explained that victims will usually remember the core gist of a traumatic event and the central sensory details they perceive as significant. Other peripheral details that weren't assigned any significance aren't remembered as easily. That's a very unique thing for each person and each situation they are in. Some traumatic memories can also be fragmented, but they can still be reliable. She said victims tend not to recall each specific time they were abused. Within domestic abuse, there's a routine that happens where a victim can conflate instances of abuse in the same way that mundane routine events that anyone does frequently can run together. She said a victim may commonly say something like, I know I got punched a bunch of times, but can't tell you when that was. Victims are more likely to remember isolated instances of abuse that are connected to a marker or a significant event for a victim, such as a birthday or anniversary. So, defense attorney Jonathan Batch says psychologist Dawn Hughes is someone who makes most of her money as a professional witness and comes to the stand with a certain perspective. He said it's very relevant to the defense, telling the court that expert witnesses are very dangerous because they come in with an aura of authority. Then, prosecutor Maureen Cormier said a document of bullet points from the presentation shouldn't be shown to the jury because it could be confusing and cause a sideshow. Judge Subramanian said the document won't come in, but Bash can ask Hughes more about the training she gave. The document, now that I'm looking at it, doesn't say really anything about anything. Then, defense attorney Jonathan Batch asked Dawn Hughes about training she gave to domestic abuse victim advocates who may need to testify in court. Dawn Hughes says she believes the group she was speaking to received a grant from the Department of Justice under the Violence Against Women Act. Dawn Hughes confirmed that she's never testified in the defense of a man accused of a sex crime. I do not evaluate offenders, she said. Then Jonathan Batch asked her about 6 meetings she had with prosecutors concerning her testimony, some of which have been since the trial started. Dawn Hughes has maintained that prosecutors have not discussed specifics of the case with her. Then, prosecutor Mitzi Steiner did another redirect examination of Dawn Hughes. Steiner confirmed with Dawn Hughes that the psychologist evaluated only court filings that were related to her testimony, and any filings she reviewed were redacted so that she couldn't read any facts of the case. In her final question on redirect, Steiner confirmed that psychologist Dawn Hughes has been retained as an expert witness by one of Diddy's defense attorneys in another case. On recross-examination, Jonathan Batch confirmed that Dawn Hughes had worked with defense attorney Brian Steele in the past, but she did not testify as a trial witness in Steele's case. So that is all, you guys. I hope you guys got something out of this. I love psychology. I love how the mind works. So yeah, don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, and turn on your notifications so you don't miss any new updates, okay? And I will see you on the next one. Peace.